Prior to joining Dell, Mr. Bhargava held various management positions at Intel, General Motors, and Siemens. His interests including volunteering on nonprofit boards focused on youth and STEM education, as well as contributing to a sustainable and strengthening circular economy. He received a Bachelor of Engineering in Electrical and Electronics Engineering from the Birla Institute of Technology, an MS in Manufacturing Systems from Lehigh University, and an MBA from the University of Michigan. It's our pleasure to have Piyush with us today, and Piyush has agreed to take questions as they come up during his presentation today. So without further ado, Mr. Bhargava, take off.
Thanks, Lamar. I appreciate the introduction. I'm going to just try and mute my. Yeah, do you guys hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So what I'm going to walk you through is sort of a practitioner's point of view on how we approach sustainability within the supply chain organization. And my hope through the presentation is to use the work that we've done to demonstrate that the areas of supply chain which are consistent sometimes with things like efficiency, speed, reliability, cost, and optimization are not incongruent with the need for sustainability. In fact, when we put them both together, you actually have a pretty powerful combination and one which resonates both with our customers and with our employees. I've been a practitioner in supply chain for over 20 years, and for me as well, the journey has been pretty instructional in that I started to think about sustainability and innovation early, but I wasn't a convert. I always sort of focused on the brass tacks of the deliverables to the business, but as we started to engage with the business as well as our customers, what we started to hear over the years is while all those things are important, they are also placing equal emphasis on things that really matter in the planet and how we then engage into the communities that we do business in. And so it's a bit of a personal journey as well that you'll see reflected in the narrative that I'm going to share with you. And I'll try to give you sound bites on the strategic context of why innovation is important in where we are as a company. And then further from that, sort of dialing into the supply chain function, how we've approached innovation and sustainability to really make a leapfrog into where we are trying to head. So that's sort of the general context of what we are trying to do. If you move us forward, or maybe I can do that myself.
You should have control.
Give me a second to try and do that. Before I get into the context of the supply chain and innovation work that we are doing, I think it's appropriate to set the table a little bit with where we are as a company. Some of the sound bites that you hear or are listening into that are reflected in the slide is an outcome on a journey that we've been on as a company for at least 7 to 10 years. If you think about our traditional client business, which would be things like notebooks and desktops, it's a consolidating industry and one where the devices that we put out in the space has gotten commoditized over time. So the profit pools in our traditional business were eroding. And with that recognition, Michael really wanted to transform the company by being more of an end-to-end solution provider. And consistent with that aspiration, you've seen us be fairly acquisitive over the last 5 or 7 years. And then a lot of that began to sort of come into a form that then needed function, and we consummated some of that to by doing two things. First, Michael took the company private, and it was the clear recognition that when you're trying to make substantive change in the trajectory of the company, the distractions of having to report to an analyst and a shareholder community on a quarterly cadence sometimes becomes a distraction. So we really wanted to place the bets for the long term. So you saw us take the company private, and that in itself was one of the biggest LBOs that we had in our industry, and maybe second or third ever attempted. So big deal. And then if we were just going through that process, and in quick succession, we announced the acquisition of EMC. EMC is a leader in the storage space, and then the reason why we went to try and sort of mash those two companies together was there was a clear sense of complementarity between what we did in our traditional client business, what we have in our enterprise stack in server, storage, networking, and then complementing it with the strength in the traditional storage business that EMC brought to pace. And so around the September-October timeframe of last year, we got approved to combine the two companies, and in so doing, what you see in the slide here is what we've got. It's a pretty compelling customer value proposition. We have over 150,000 employees, 40,000 sales professionals, and just the statistics around our market reach are pretty significant. We service about 98% of all Fortune 500 companies, and presence in 180 countries with 25 manufacturing locations. And then if you look at the Gartner Magic Quadrant, we are number one in a number of those, and we feel good about that because it allows us a place to service our customers from a place of strength, knowing that things that they may be looking for, whether it's in the client space, the enterprise space, security, we have a solution from them within our portfolio. Sometimes less understood is the fact that we also have significant investments in research and development, over $13 billion that we've spent over the last 3 years or so, and a number of different mandates around IP through patents and applications that we have that sort of secure that IP for us. So I think it's really important to understand the journey that we've been on, transforming the company from what is otherwise considered a commoditized market to one where we are trying to build our capability into the adjacencies to be an end-to-end provider for everything that our customers may be looking for, and to do it at scale. And doing it at scale is important to underscore, because within the same space, within the same market, we've had other players in our industry that are taking a different strategy. The one that we are following under Michael's leadership is to go big, to win big. And it's our belief that our customers would want to do business with providers that make it easy to do business with them, and that we can then be the one-stop shop, if you will, for most things that they want. So that's sort of the context of the company and the journey that we've been on. Next, I'm going to pivot and talk a little bit about the discussion for today, which is around sustainability and the supply chain organization. But before I do that, any questions that anyone may have on what I've sort of described so far? I will continue to move forward then. If you think about our aspirations around sustainability, it really gets driven from the top. In Michael, we have a leader who feels strongly about doing the right thing in the communities that we live in the communities we do business in. And those aspirations start to get memorialized in the legacy of good goals and aspirations that we set out. It's in 2012 that we announced the 2020 Legacy of Good plan. And these were really 12 goals that we articulated. And these are big, hairy, audacious goals that we didn't know how we'd be able to get to, but they were reflective of who we wanted to be as a company and how we wanted to show up in the communities that we were in. And so if you think back to the traditional view of Dell and more broadly supply chain organizations, I think supply chain as a function is organized around efficiency, around the speed and reliability of what we develop. There's often an intense focus both on internal and external stakeholders on standardizing processes, putting control measures on things like cost and supply, and trying and mitigating as much of the risk as possible in the end-to-end provision of goods and services. That's oftentimes how supply chain and its success gets defined. And the things that then jump out when you look at that narrative is standards, risk mitigation and risk control, optimization and reliability. And oftentimes those are things that are not very consistent with sort of blue ocean thinking, where you're trying to innovate and do things differently, and by definition that takes you away from the mean or the standards, if you will. So in the articulation of our goals, we saw a bit of a contradiction in how we had to operate, because our legacy of good goals, which I'll just share with you here shortly, required us to think broad, think outside the box, because at current course and speed, we would not go achieve those goals. But by the same token, our heritage and our strength in the supply chain organization was built on a very different muscle. The muscle that we were built on was really around standardization and optimization. And what we needed to do to meet the legacy of goals was to break that mold and do some things that are different. So let me just sort of build it out for you to help you understand the goals that we have. Our first sort of banner of things that we wanted to do was to reduce the environmental impact. And that sort of manifests itself into things like reduction in greenhouse emissions from the operations that we have, the reduction in water usage, making sure that the waste management effort that we have in our operations is consistent with how we think best practices exist, and then making sure that the footprint of buildings that we have around the world are sustainable and sustainable compliant. And so that was sort of the first set of goals we had. And then if you think about the impact that we would have around the social and environmental responsibility, we had a few more set of goals around transparency of the supply chain, making sure that we were being responsible around how we sourced, where we sourced from, and in the areas of packaging, making sure that we had 100% sustainable materials that we're going into our packaging effort, because more and more people were giving us the feedback that great products, great devices, but you deliver it into our environment in ways that doesn't feel consistent with how we want to manage packaging. So we had some goals around that as well. Finally, helping customers reduce their environmental impact of the use of IT infrastructure. And those goals looked something like this. Around the energy intensity of our product portfolios when they got into our customer environment. When the products are delivered, we wanted to make sure that the recycled content of plastic that we had was truly compostable and recyclable. And by 2020, we want to be 100% there. We want to be able to recover. We just don't want to sell the product, but we want to manage a through the life cycle, and so therefore recovery of used assets becomes extremely important. So hopefully through this you have a sense of the kind of goals that we had within our legacy of good, and then use of technology in addressing environmental issues, because there are things that we do well, and that is around technology and our supply chain proficiency, and the more that we can use our strengths to help with the ecosystem that we engage with, the better off we are. So those are sort of the 12 goals that Michael really helped us sort of put in place, and it kind of articulated in very, very specific, measurable ways what we wanted to achieve in the 8 or 10 years that we have from the starting of 2012. And again, the thing I want to continue to underscore is these are goals that we had very little idea of how we would achieve, because again, what had got us to the point of success thus far was really built on a very different set of muscles. We knew how to be on ice, but we played hockey, and we were being required to do a dance. And we realized that all our training over the years would not prepare us to hit these goals. And I think it's that recognition that then really became the basis for how we started to approach innovation. And in some ways, we had to think about the frameworks differently as well, because our customers were keeping us accountable to that goals as well. Because when we asked our customers and we looked at the profile of customer requests that came in to us, almost 20%, and this is dated by a few years, and I'm sure the numbers have grown, a lot of the requests that were coming to us from customers outside of the product mandate had to do with the environment. And so it wasn't sufficient for us to just have the best product from a feature specification perspective, because we had to be able to answer the remaining part of the narrative around how those products were beginning to impact the environments in which they were being used. So with that in mind, before I get into the notion of circular, we also had to assess the toolkits that we had. We were very good at managing continuity of supply, the quality in factories, cost management, etc. What we were not really good at was figuring out how to innovate in the supply chain function. And we really were trying to change the topology of how we approached, how economies and the supply chain ecosystem that we were doing business with. And, this is a fairly well-publicized schematic, if you will, coming from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. But if you look at the left side of the slide, it talks about the take, make, dispose sort of topology that has been traditional, where you extract things that you need in your products and services, you use them to make things that you sell into your customers, and at the end of the life cycle, you dispose them in a way that is hopefully reducing waste in the environment. But we all know that linear topology or linear economy is not doing what it needs to, and it manifests itself into things that we are seeing in the environment. We are seeing it in the oceans. We are seeing it in the communities that we engage with, and it was pretty clear to us that a traditional linear economy model would not work, and therefore we begin to start looking at the circular economy, where you have this virtuous cycle of being able to take what you've sort of built from the environment, but post-consumption you try to upcycle it, or at least find uses of things that you've already put into use, therefore reducing the overall footprint that you essentially engage with in the environment. And that's a fundamental shift in the way that you think about your supply chain function, because what was previously considered end-of-life assets that would have to be disposed then become a source of materials that you can actually pull from. And I think that really changed the whole mindset in the way that we were approaching our supply chain function. So with the change in mindset, then we had to operationalize what we wanted to do and in our journey to hit our sort of 2020 goals. And we knew that we had the right air cover, because if we didn't have Michael's commitment behind the legacy of good goals, we would have lesser success when we started to evangelize change with the business. But knowing that Michael had actually set the tone and he was the one who's holding the company accountable to these goals really helped, because we had the ability to then revert back to that narrative and say, you know, we are doing this because it's really important to our leadership. I'm going to pause there, and before I get into the next set of slides, I wanted to find out if you had any questions in the strategic context of what I'm talking about.
So thank you. This is Scott Rappaport from Shell, and thank you for that introduction. See some parallels actually with some of the thinking taking place in Shell as well. What about the legislation and regulation aspect? Were there drivers associated with that related to the goals and objectives that you mentioned?
Absolutely. So I think as we started to build out some of the programs that I'm going to get into here shortly, we did have the need for us to be more aligned through our government affairs organization into regulation and policy. Some of the regulation that we deal with or compliance issues that we deal with in the electronic industry get codified in the Electronic Industries Code of Conduct, or EICC, and I'm sure every industry has its version of that, but it defines things like you know, what we want to see in our supply chain around labor laws, around use of hazardous materials, RoHS and the like. So naturally, that's a tried and tested sort of moniker that we continue to subscribe to. But back to your question, in attaining these goals, we are testing some of the boundaries of what regulation exists. And I'll speak to it in the context of ocean plastics at the back end of the presentation. But in some cases, we were charting new ground. We were getting into places that regulation and policy did not exist, and therefore we absolutely had to develop a mindset of a public-private partnership framework where we were influencing the right policymakers to create an environment that was conducive not just for us, but through us for anyone else who may be aspiring to do the same things around legacy of good.
Much.
All right. Any other questions? Else I'm going to pivot and talk a little bit about the specifics of our journey, if you will. So creating the right innovation culture within our supply chain function, procurement function, really required us to assess where we were from both a toolkit and a culture perspective. And the elements that we started to play out were around communication, so broad knowledge of our legacy of good goals so that everyone in the organization had a sense of where we were headed. It's sort of getting the family aligned on where we are headed for the vacation and giving everyone a sense of how long it'll take us to get there so that the angst associated with are we there yet comes down. So broad communication to make sure that everyone had a view of our legacy of good goals, as I shared with you on previous slides, was important. We also had to think about training, right? If we're going to be asking our supply chain organization to doing above and beyond what they've typically done around standardization and optimization, then do we have to train them on a different skill set? So that's where we sort of benchmarked and came up with sort of the best practice that was inspired by the design consultancy firm IDEO, where they use a process called design thinking. And it's an efficient framework for individuals and teams to use their time and resources to pursue solutions to problems that otherwise would not have a very sort of logical or reachable solution. It really sort of pushes the envelope in terms of thinking. And so we trained a lot of our practitioners in design thinking as it relates to really understanding how you drive open innovation. And thinking itself would not get us there, and so we also got the teams trained on structured problem solving. And there again, we benchmarked what were some of the industry's best practices, so that once you have ideation, which then identifies ways for you to be able to be accretive to a goal, you also have to equip the teams with a structured way of approaching that problem to get you to the destination. And so I think, making sure that the communication, the training, and the capability mandate is not underinvested, I think is the key message that I'm trying to get across on this slide. Because you could have these lofty goals, but if you don't have a capable organization equipped with tools and processes to help you get there, I think it becomes an aspiration, and it's not really something that you can make a lot of substantive progress on. The other thing we realized is, we are a leveraged organization. We do a lot of work with our partner ecosystem, our suppliers. So making sure that we were not just stopping with our own employees, but also reaching into a multi-tier supply chain was important to us. So the same design thinking workshops that we hosted with our own captive folks, we also started to roll that out with a select few suppliers that we thought were critical to the task. And so we then became equipped with same language. The vernacular became a lot more common between us and our key supplier partners. And then once we had that language, we were able to translate that language into specific goals that would, when all added up, would help us achieve the bigger goals that we had in our legacy of good mandate. And then the last piece on the slide, which I still think is critical, is the supplier relationship management, the SRM framework. We had to really, if we were going to innovate with our key partners, we had to move away from a transactional mindset to a shared destiny mindset. We had to not just get their heart, but we also had to give them a sense of why that was important in their own journey. And the more we started to develop those joint sense of destinations, I think the more engagement we got from the partner network as well. So let me move forward on this. And again, this is just a revisit, but these are the goals we were trying to achieve. And again, I've described to you the fact that it starts with goal setting. It then sort of translates to an honest assessment of who you are as an organization and what you're good at, and then assessing gaps within that organization in achieving these goals. And in our case, it was the recognition that for innovating for sustainability, we would have to equip both our teams and our suppliers with a different skill set, which is where design thinking, 7-step problem solving came into play. And then making sure that our partner management framework, in our case it was the SRM or supplier relationship management, was sort of conducive and supportive of what you were trying to do. So how did it play out into the organization, right? We had to then create frameworks within the organization that would then allow us to intercept those ideas. because again, open innovation and open thinking is great, but how do you then translate that source of innovation into things that the teams and the organization can actually do something with? And so we created a governance body, which was essentially a steering committee of people. First it started out with a coalition of the willing, right? It was who's got passion around this. But then we also systematically pulled into that steering committee the key stakeholders that were decision makers around what we were trying to drive aggressively on. And so that then became a way for us to govern progress against these goals. And then we also hosted a few things, and I'm just taking a few examples here, but both with our internal and external parties. I talked about the design thinking workshops. We also started to host annual Innovation Olympics. So we have, 3 or 4 different categories within that Olympics, but we ask our employees to submit their best ideas, and those ideas are then assessed by a panel of people that are equipped with, what we are trying to judge the ideas against. So it's guided innovation and recognition of work that is being done within our employee base or ideas that are coming in from our employee base that sort of don't get lost in translation. So the Innovation Olympic mechanism really allowed the best of those ideas to float to the top. We recognized and celebrated those ideas and put the right sort of air cover and support behind those ideas through the steering committee to move them forward. And then the annual Packaging Innovation Summit is another example of leveraged innovation, knowing that we are technology experts and not packaging experts, but a lot of our legacy of good goals would be in the packaging area. We started to engage our supply base in an innovation summit. And we didn't just invite the current suppliers that we had, knowing that we may be limited or our blinders would be on when we only talked about it in the context of what we were doing. But we also started to engage suppliers in packaging that were in other adjacent industries like food and beverage or automotive. But if we found people or if we benchmarked and came across people that were doing some really provocative and interesting work in packaging, we brought them into Dell to listen into their story and then to learn from them and hopefully see applicability in what we are trying to do in our legacy of good goals to see how that could get pulled in. So again, the key thing I want to sort of highlight in this slide is the fact that the infrastructure that you put in place to enable those ideas and innovation to actually get operationalized becomes really important. And it does require an investment in both people and management mindshare. Because if it's not important, then management will not focus on it, and the organization picks up on that very quickly. And if you don't put in the infrastructure to sort of move it forward, there again you risk other things getting in the way. Let me pause there. It's sort of a descriptor of what we did in terms of the framework to operationalize innovation, but are there any questions around this?
Yeah, the Sky report from Shell again. Going back to the annual Packaging Innovation Summit, now this is something that you kind of facilitate internally and you invite external people kind of as you needed. And what was it about packaging that required you to kind of have an entire summit around that specific goal in comparison to the other goals that you had of the 12?
Right. So I think within packaging, one, it has a big role to play in our legacy of good goals. So we've talked about 50 million pounds of recyclable material by 2016, which is a goal that we achieved. And then by 2020, we want to be 100% recyclable and compostable. So it then becomes the first touch with our customers, right? When we have a device show up, it's the first touch with our customers, and if that experience of unboxing the device is not something that is evocative and consistent with our brand tenets, I think we begin to dilute that experience of the device. Therefore, we've elevated the importance of packaging for two reasons. One, it's the first thing the customer touches, and therefore we want that experience to be in line with our ethos. And second, recognizing that a lot of the goals that we have in our legacy of good aspirations will be met through our packaging mandate. So that was sort of the key motivator. But we're also looking at other areas around energy consumption, etc. I just have packaging there as an example. But it's not the only place. It's not the only place we're doing the double click.
Okay. No, thank you for that. And then a kind of follow-up question with going to the left-hand side of the slide here around the innovation workshops, and in terms of how you prototype and test, is this something? Yeah. So I guess I'll just leave it at that. How do you prototype and test?
You're talking about the ideas or the process itself?
The ideas. Yeah.
Yeah. So we do have, through the innovation workshops, an output of those design thinking engagements that are then captured in sort of a, for the lack of a better word, tracker. And the tracker is then, we start to measure yield out of that tracker. How many of those ideas, how many ideas got generated? How many of those ideas actually went to stage 1, stage 2, stage 3? And how many of those were finally implemented? And I think we have a mechanism by which we look at that on a systematic way, and then we report out on that. So every leader in the supply chain organization gets together with Kevin, who's our chief supply chain officer, and reports out on the progress against that innovation effort. How many design thinking workshops were hosted within the organization, how many ideas got generated, what were some of the top ideas, how many of those were implemented. And again, this goes back to that management attention. If we just had these workshops and did really nothing with it, I think we would do it once and then we'd be done. But the fact that we stayed the course, the tenacity and the commitment to follow through is, I think, what started to make a big difference.
Great. All right. Thank you very much.
All right. And then the outcomes that we drove out of these, the outputs that we got out of these, started to fall in these categories of sustainable products, sustainable materials, and sustainable manufacturing processes. So I'm pretty sure that you can see the parallels with your own organizations, but in any given area, you can find a reason to be more sustainable. I'm going to give a couple of examples. I'm going to pivot here to talk more about, did this work? And the short answer is it did, and it worked quite well. And so if you think about volatile organic compounds, VOCs, that you found in things like paints, etc. So one of the ideas that came through these innovation workshops was the use of IMR, or in-molded rolled films, which reduces the need for VOC paints, and then more environmentally friendly paints that we could then sort of bring into our product set away from traditional. And these were just ideas that were available to us if we asked the right questions, right? Because our supply base oftentimes services more than one customer, more than one industry. But the fact that we were beginning to ask questions with a different mindset, it wasn't really about how much do I pay for paint, and can you reduce the cost of paint over time? That was not the question. Maybe that was not the only question we asked, because naturally we still wanted to support that optimization effort. But we started to ask the question differently. So if we have VOC in our paints, and if we want to move away from that, what choices do we have? And by asking that same question a little bit differently for the same product set, we started to get slightly different answers. And then we took some of those best answers and implemented them into our products. And IMR and the environmentally friendly paint are sort of two examples of that. Results, we were able to reduce VOC by 20% in our mobile devices and almost 60% in our desktop all-in-ones. That's a pretty significant reduction. We were able to do that in a pretty quick pace. So definitely something that we feel good about. Another area, and this is an example from packaging, but we've been investing in alternative materials, recyclable, compostable materials for a period of time. We looked at sort of our traditional hydrocarbon-based plastic or cardboard boxes and started to assess things like bamboo, wheat straw, mushroom, molded pulp and paper. These are more environmentally friendly materials, but they did require a pretty heavy lift for us to commercialize at scale, because in some cases this is agricultural waste, but this goes back to this notion of circular economy. We said if this is just waste in an adjacent or a different industry, can we actually use that waste to sort of build it into our packaging manifest? And when you start to do this initially, you're sort of developing an untested, non-scaled supply chain, and therefore there's more work to be done. And when you start to do more work, it comes at a cost. And this is where I think that balance of, how do you translate this back to the business? Because traditional business intuition is, hey, green is great, sustainability is good, as long as I get it for free, and as long as someone else pays for it, I'd love to adopt it into my business. And that won't work. So, we recognize that we are supporting a business, and therefore a lot of our sustainable effort had to be at cost point replacement or as close to it as possible. So when we started to scale these materials, these alternate materials, we really had to start thinking outside the box in terms of how we scale the supply chain for some of these alternate materials at scale and at competitive costs. But again, the key point on this that I want to emphasize is, we've sort of built on our heritage of trying to do things differently. In technology, we're good at incubating nascent and new technologies and bringing them to commercial scale. We do it in things like memory and SSDs and processors and chipsets. You take the same mindset and you put it on sustainable, and you begin to see a lot of good results. So this is where our strength in supply chain and our heritage of bringing incubation technologies to commercial scale, when we started to apply that same mindset to sustainability, we began to see success. And these are just sort of cases in point where we were able to deliver good results around that. Talking about the manufacturing processes, so when you talk about a product manufactured in our factories, on the packaging side, and I've talked about it a little bit already, people want a denser cube, they want less packaging content, and they want it to be curbside recyclable. And by taking that mindset of sustainability in our packaging effort, we've been able to save close to $50 million in cost and over 30 million pounds of reduced packaging. And when you start to take these numbers and translate it into the impact that it has on the P&L, it's pretty substantive. And this is where the GMs of our business began to look at it as something that was helping them achieve their goals in addition to the legacy of good goals that we were driving. And that's sort of the key point I'm wanting to emphasize in this narrative is for us to have a sustainable and sticky agenda around a sustainable supply chain, we have to have the right hooks back into the business and people that are going to be supporting this effort through the product mandate else, you're always sort of pushing the rope uphill. We also do take back, and this is an example of the work we do at the end of life. So we have different places that you can actually bring in products once they get to end of life through a expanded recycling and collection process. I think we've now expanded to close to 85 or 90 countries where people can actually walk in to, say, a Goodwill store, and we will accept not just Dell products, but any brand products, and put it to use the best we can. In some cases, we've taken that product, and by working with one of our partners, Wistron, we were able to regrind some of the plastic that we found in this end-of-life products and upcycle it in our new products, as an example. So again, looking at the full life cycle of the product and taking a circular mindset to see that the end-of-life products could actually be valuable, could be a marketplace for us to source from. I mean, that just changed the whole mindset in the way that we were approaching end-of-life assets. And then the closed-loop supply chain also manifests itself in the infrastructure of the buildings, et cetera, and you can see the impact that we have had on greenhouse gas emissions and things like that. Another area that we started to invest, and I talked a little bit about bamboo, wheat straw, et cetera. About the beginning of last year, we started to work with Adrian. Adrian is our social good advocate, and he brought to us the notion of ocean health, and the fact that at the current course, we have about 8 million pounds of plastic, or actually 8 million metric tons of plastic that enters the ocean every year. To help you visualize that, that's about 18-wheeler worth of plastic waste that gets offloaded into the oceans every minute or 2 minutes at current rates. And in the next 10 years, the rate with which pollution is entering the oceans is actually going to be doubling. And by 2050, there's going to be more plastic in the ocean than fish. And the fact that 70% of the world's population depends on ocean-based animals for their protein, that becomes a real issue. And so, what I'm describing to you is an environmental issue that is getting a lot of attention. And when we started to dialogue on this, it's not a natural intersection with our supply chain mandate. It's not something that we are not ocean experts, but we also recognize that it's not one which we can sit on the sideline on. And so we started to brainstorm, and this is again an example of open innovation. We said, if this is a big problem, what can we actually do something? And so we chartered a feasibility study that we completed late last year, early this year, and then we sort of started to map where ocean plastic existed around the world. And equipped with that knowledge, we were able to do a proof of concept of a supply chain where we are able to blend ocean-bound HDPE and blend it with recyclable plastic to come up with packaging that is now 100% recyclable and has a fair content of plastic that would otherwise get to the ocean. And we just announced that in February at the Economist World Ocean Summit. And we are, what's really important about that element is we are doing an open source on that, which is we are sharing the work that we are doing on ocean plastic pollution, or the containment of ocean plastic pollution, and sharing it with everyone and inviting others to join in, because we recognize that, again, the ocean plastic issue is a substantive problem, and no matter how big of an effort that we do at Dell, it's still going to be a proverbial drop in the ocean. And so for us to be able to make a substantive difference as a company and as a corporate entity, and hopefully others see the need to do the same, we are absolutely open to sharing the work that we're doing. And just since the announcement, we've got a lot of expression of interest, some from the companies that are represented on the call as well, to sort of join forces. And our hope there is that by our involvement, by our being in this effort, we add more credibility and diligence into a scaled supply chain that can start looking at ocean-bound plastic as a source of material that people can use, because at the end of the day, 80% of what gets to the ocean is from land-based sources. And the last place that you want to actually start addressing the issue is when it gets to the ocean, because at that point it breaks down into microbeads, and the collection and remediation of that plastic becomes almost impossible. And that's an opinion that we validated with some of the best people that are doing research in academia, etc. So naturally this was a collaboration that we drove with the people who knew ocean and ocean health well. We brought that into our supply chain mandate and then started to build out that effort. And so we just announced that we're going to 10x the impact that we're going to have through that ocean plastic effort, and we'll be using the next couple of months here to really scale out a supply chain in Southeast Asia, as that's the source of a lot of the ocean plastic pollution. Again, I use that as a case study, as an example of how we've taken a sort of open-ended, innovative mindset on a problem that otherwise people would not have imagined that Dell would get involved in. But knowing that we have this legacy of good goals, it becomes a lot more, the dots start to connect a lot better, if you will. So let me pause there. Any questions on the ocean plastic work that we're doing?
So just a thought here, Piyush. In terms of the ocean plastic, are you looking at it from reducing the amount of plastic overall, or from, it may sound like kind of dissolving the plastic within the water?
So we have reduction efforts already in place. So if you think about the cube density of how much packaging material we use both in our design and structures, there's clearly an effort to reduce the amount of material we use.
Mm-hmm.
But in the case of ocean plastic, what we are attempting to do is, where we do have need for packaging protection, could we actually look at ocean-bound plastic as a source of that material?
Oh,
The challenge always is that virgin plastic, given the price of crude, is cheap. And so the incentive for people to do something different is not very high, which is why things like bioplastics and compostable plastics have not taken off, because the investments in research and development that is required to bring it to commercial scale sometimes is not very easy to justify when you have cheap virgin plastic available. But the problem with plastic is it's ubiquitous and it lives on forever. And so if it lives on forever, then why not capture it and put it back into use? And that's sort of the thesis we have around this work. And the reason why we're having to blend it is and we did some work in Haiti. I don't know if you've ever, all of us who've ever been to a beach know what the problem is, but when you go into a place like Haiti or Indonesia, etc., it's so in your face. The concentration of that plastic waste and how it's beginning to impact communities and people and health is too stark. And that really became our calling, saying we got to do something. And it's a soupy mess, right? When you go into plastic waste, what you find is the material properties, the strength properties and things like that are not easy to sort of just repurpose into products. You have to go through a cleaning, a sortation process, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's why we had to blend it with otherwise recyclable HDPE to come up with material that can be used. And we continue to find different use cases, whether it's on slip sheets and whether it's on end caps and trays and stuff like that where we can use. So we just want to make sure that we have our proof of concept, which is what we've stood up recently and announced. In fact, end of this month, we're going to start shipping our first ocean-bound plastic on our XPS 13 product, which is sort of our flagship product. So we're not just designing it into a low-end. This is our flagship product, and we're gonna put it in there, and from there try to scale it into other areas that we can use it.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Does that
Great.
answer your question?
It does, yes. Thank you.
All right. And then, like I said, in some of these problems, we recognize that our participation is enough. And yet others, like in the case of ocean plastics, we're trying to catalyze an industry-wide change mandate. So we've just chartered a working group where we'll get companies to start dialoguing on this issue, and through collaboration start to make more substantive and accelerated progress. Because like I said, it's sort of the metaphor of draining a sink. Here the tap is filling the sink faster than we can drain it, and unless we bring all our buckets to the problem, it's not going to get solved.
Mm-hmm. How do you find out more information about this ocean plastic industry-wide movement?
So because it's open source, you can actually just type in, and I'm happy to follow up with sound bites and links and white paper that we've got written on this area.
That'd be great. Yeah.
But I mean, just a Google search will give you some information, but I will package something that could be made available to you for easy consumption as a follow-up to this call.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
So my question back to you, and this is, and I've touched on a few different things, so I'm going to try and bring it back together in the next few minutes here. The first thing I talked about was the strategic context, and our strategic context is change. And you've seen it in the way that we've sort of taken the company private. I've talked about how that relates to sort of the acquisitions of capability that we've brought into the organization. And then the knowing that the change is important for our continued success, it starts with the tone that the leaders set. In our case, Michael's been the most vocal advocate of what we're doing in sustainability, and that really helps. Because every conversation can easily end in, hey, but tell me where's the business case on that, and then we can pull out the Michael card and say, Michael said so. I'm being facetious a little bit, but at the end of the day, that setting of the tone from the top is important. Third, the capability assessment to make sure that whether it's sustainability or any other sort of breakthrough effort that you're trying to drive in the organization, is your organization equipped with the right capability, tools, and processes? And in our case, like I said, we are tuned for optimization and standardization. That's what we do, and do quite well, frankly. And so we didn't want to lose the recipe on that, but we also wanted to add to it. And that's where things like design thinking, structured problem solving, et cetera, come in, because at the end of the day, we can't ask the same set of people to start doing something different without equipping them with the right training and capabilities. Next thing I talked about was the infrastructure and investment. In our case, I talked about the steering committee that we put in place for sustainability. the investments in the design thinking workshops, the Olympics that we host on an annual basis, the innovation summits. So you got to put your money where your mouth is, because this won't happen automatically. And then the follow-through is important. You know, the question on the call was a very good one, which is, what do you do with it? When you have thousands of ideas that come through this process, you have to be able to act on those ideas, dispose what is not needed, float up what has value, and then see it through fruition. Otherwise, you risk the next time you go ask people for their ideas, the first thing they're going to ask you is, what did you do with the ideas I gave you last time? And that's where I think the virtuous cycle only kicks in, when you have the right infrastructure to follow through on that. And then wins are important. You got to celebrate wins, and I talked about VOC as an example, asset recovery as an example, packaging materials as an example, but you got to be able to take what you're doing, and where you have successes, make them visible signposts against which people can find direction. Because when you do that, you inspire others to join force. And in the case of Ocean Plastic, our hope is that we're inspiring not just people within the company, but even outside the company to join forces, because the problem at hand is too big for us to handle. So that's sort of the lead up to now. And my hope is that you're thinking about sustainability a little bit differently. Since 2003, we've had over 500 ideas that we actually were generated and implemented. We've realized over $200 million of savings. So when I talk to business leaders, I can translate innovation and supply chain into P&L speak, right? This is not just a good thing to do, but it's a thing that is actually helping them meet their business goals as well. And we are 90% of the way to our ready. So, good progress, and we still have some gaps to close, but at current course and speed, I think we feel confident we can actually get there. And then I think the last slide is just sort of a build-up of some of the things that we've done. So I'll let it sit here for you to read. But that's really all the prepared content I wanted to share. I do have your request on sharing more on ocean plastics, and we'll follow up on that. But outside of that, are there any specific questions or comments on sort of our journey in innovation and sort of the cradle-to-cradle sustainable sourcing that we're trying to do?
I have a question regarding the countries you're in, because I understand, you're all around the world. So are there parts of the world that you have a lot more trouble pursuing these goals than others?
So short answer is yes. Sometimes we have to do more convincing than others, and it has to do with the question that was asked on policy and regulation. So there are certain countries in the EU that are very progressive and supportive of sustainable goals, and therefore our ability to sort of make the case with them to follow through on the things that we are asking the ecosystem to respond to is a lot easier. By contrast, there are other countries in say, the Pacific Rim or Southeast Asia where it is not as transparent, and it's not as easy to make the case because the regulation and policy has not been as progressive. And so in our case, as we think of our supply chain and our footprint, a lot of our manufacturing is Asia-based. We do have manufacturing locations a lot of places in the world, but if you think about the concentration, a lot of electronic industry manufacturing is based out of Asia. And so we have to be mindful of that. And the other thing that, and I'll take the example of ocean plastics again, we're trying to figure out where the intercepts are. So almost 70% of ocean-bound plastic pollution comes from 5 countries: China, Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, and Thailand. And so if that's the source of the problem, and if our manufacturing is in China, then how do we create a scalable supply chain from one of those locations going into China? That's the problem we're trying to tackle right now. And then further from that, border crossing waste is not the easiest, your trade compliance folks will tell you, the government regulations policy around that is not a straight line. So this is where public-private partnerships come in. And the more we can have a voice of industry into policymakers to allow us to remove the friction around that becomes important. So a bit of a long-winded answer to your question, but the world is not stacked equally. And I think being mindful of where your consumption profile is and where the source profile is becomes really important.
Can you give us an idea of the number of suppliers in your supply chain and how deep are you able to penetrate that in terms of these ideas and monitoring your suppliers?
Yeah. So in terms of number of suppliers, our ecosystem between direct production and indirect procurement is close to 50,000 suppliers. Naturally, a lot of our spend is concentrated with a much smaller number, and therefore, we tend to prioritize where we can have the most substantive difference. Naturally, the long tail that would be sort of typical for any supply chain effort, you still need to focus in on by setting the right expectations, making sure that your compliance requirements and your quality management systems are well understood no matter where you are in the supply chain. But when you're trying to do a heavy lift and change, my suggestion would be start sort of chasing where the big transactions are. And I think if you drive some wins there, I think translating it to the rest of the supply base becomes easier. And to your question on how deep we go into the supply chain, it's typically tier 1, tier 2. But our hope is that by setting very clear expectations around what we need in the supply chain with our tier 1, tier 2 suppliers, that we are sort of inspiring them to do the same thing with their own. It doesn't always happen, and we do find some minor and in other cases egregious issues where people don't comply, but that's where we have sort of checks and balances through the audit process. All right, I'll continue to see if there's more questions, but I'll tee up my closing slide here just so you can read it. I think a lot of the points on this slide I've made already. So maybe I won't go into the narrative here, but I leave it here to sort of have you think about this. How does this apply to your company context? Do you have the right support from the top in driving these goals? Are you as leaders investing in your people to equip them to succeed? Are you having measurable goals to which you're driving? And when you drive things like sustainability, which is sometimes nebulous, do you have very specific guideposts to get you there so that it's not just an aspirational goal, but it's a real goal to which we are sort of driving to. I mean, in our case, it's the legacy of good, those 12 goals that I talked about, as clear as it gets. And there's no doubt in anybody's mind on whether we're driving to a direction or not. And then do you have the right infrastructure to measure progress towards those goals? And if the answer to any of those is not a resounding yes, then maybe that exposes an opportunity for you to think about your effort and maybe shore up where things may need some help.
If there are no further questions, Piyush, I want to thank you and Dell so much for participating today and for educating us on all of these outstanding results. And it's easy to understand why you won the Innovation Award of the Year for 2016 based on this presentation. As a follow-up to this, we will be sending out a link to the audio version of this. I understand there's a video on YouTube that Piyush thinks would be very, very useful as well. We'll send the link to that video. Are the slides made available, yes or no? The slides will be made available for this as well. I suspect Piyush, I'm putting words in his mouth, but would be delighted to follow with any of you that have questions at some later date, and you can certainly contact Diana or me directly, and we will put you in touch with Piyush, and he can respond as he has time and is willing to do that. Again, we thank you very much for all participating today. You'll be receiving this in a packet later today or early tomorrow, along with 3 or 4 questions that we'd like to get from your perspective on how the value you saw in this particular webinar and any ideas you have for future webinars. So if there are no further questions, we thank you all for participating today, and have a great rest of your Thursday.